Okay, today's going to be a DIY how-to video on how to build your own trans cooler, as well as how to install it. And today's example is going to be in a Turbo 400, but the concept applies to most other automatic transmissions. These units are commercially available. A lot of great companies out there selling a quality product. But if you're like me, I'm a DIY kind of guy, and I like to build things with my hands, use my own ideas, and make it fit my personal preference and my personal taste. So what I've got behind me is the one I just built. I'll kind of break down the parts. Most of these things are available on eBay. I'll tell you overall cost of what I've got invested, and then I'll take a break and I'll go out to the car and I'll kind of show you the layout of current transmission lines and a dump valve and how the plumbing of these things works, and I'll kind of break it all down for you. So what we got is portable transmission cooler, primarily used on race cars, racing vehicles, to cool it down between rounds. It can be used on pretty much anything you want. The basic components are a transmission cooler. There are multiple styles and price points on these. A pump. Pumps, this is one of the places you don't really want to skimp on. I have used a Tilton fluid transfer pump, and what I learned was it was a much cheaper pump than the Turbowerx that's on here now. And what would happen is, because the transmission fluid is obviously hot, the Tilton pump would, it had a thermal fuse in it. So when the motor itself would get hot from pumping fluid, and the hot fluid, it would trip the thermal circuit breaker all the time, the thermal fuse, and it would just shut down. So I broke down and bought a nice I broke down and bought a nice Turbowerx pump. The other thing you see here, I commonly, and I will refer to this as an inverter, but it is a converter. It's taking 110 volts AC and converting it to 12 volt DC. I believe I've got that right. I added an auxiliary filter, and in that filter housing I drilled and tapped and added a temperature probe so that I could see the temperature of the fluid as it leaves the filter housing and it's going back to the car. On mine, I also added a Milwaukee Power Wheels battery adapter, so that in the event I don't have AC power, or the inverter goes bad, or I am needing to take the car to the staging lanes for a different class or the next round and we haven't had an opportunity to cool it, I can just plug a Milwaukee 18 volt battery in and power it up. I added, a friend of mine did his, and I saw he added a battery box on his. So I thought that was a neat idea, because our transmission cooler and our battery are both accessible from the passenger side of the vehicle. So it just kind of helps for storage, having that on there. I'll go through a couple of the concepts and ideas I implemented when I was building this. So if you look at the overall dimension, it's roughly 18 inches wide. And I did that so that when the transmission cooler itself is mounted, it's mounted flush with this edge. And I took into account that these fittings and things were going to stick out a little bit further. So I wanted a little bit of extra protection if this thing gets banged around in the trailer. I didn't want the framework to be just as wide as the cooler, and then these are sticking out and they're subject to, any abuse that they would get. So in concept, what this thing does, two hoses here. One will suck the hot fluid from the pan on the transmission. It comes up the hose to the inlet side of the pump, goes through the pump. It's then pushed up into the cooler. The fan turns on, extracts the heat. It comes out into the remote filter, and then that's where the temperature is measured out the filter and then back to the car. I'll explain a little bit about how I plumb that on a car. Like I said, I'll break the video, but all in, the way this transmission cooler is in front of you, I'm about $1,200 into it. There are things, this tranny cooler was roughly half of that cost. So there are a lot of other options you can use. This inverter, there are different options for that. I have a spare now that only costs 30 bucks roughly off of Amazon, but this particular model is a 60 amp, 600 watt, I believe. It might be slightly higher, converter. And like I said, I bought another one that is roughly 30 bucks. The the Turbowerx pump. This is a particular model is a 1.75 gallon pump. There are more expensive and there are cheaper versions of it. This one works fine. I've been using this for the past several years on my existing setup. So talking about my existing setup, one of the things that, you know, being a DIY guy, I saw these transmission coolers out, you know, a few years ago, and they were $1,500 to $2,000, and that was just outside of my budget. So the concept, I'll show you photos here in a minute, or the actual unit, but my old transmission cooler, which has worked fine for the past 5 years, consisted of a F250 transmission cooler, an old lawn chair frame, this pump, about 12 feet of rubber 3/8 transmission hose, and a 12 volt fan. And this exact converter was on there. And that worked fine. We would go from the end of a pass, roughly 190 degrees transmission temp, fluid temp, to 110 degrees in about 20 or 25 minutes. So when you're buying your fan, I chose the heavier overall unit and a thicker core Deral. You can go with a thinner one. You can go with an existing fan and transmission cooler concept. Some guys I've seen use a very thin one, and then they would put a mirror image of it on the other side, and so the air gets sucked in the center between, and air goes out this way and air goes out the other way, and so they're basically using they're doubling the surface area of their tranny cooler. So the way this one works is I'll plug it in here, and this switch is from a these are commonly used, this is Amazon as well, commonly used in things like home computers or power strips or power supplies or things like that. So to use it, simply turn it on. The gauge shows us what temperature it is right now in here. You heard the fan kick on and the pump is running. Turn it off, and then now say I'm at that situation where I don't have time to cool it in the pits. I need to go up in the staging lanes because we hot lap the car and we go multiple classes, and the transmission temperature is one of the biggest issues we run into. So adding this battery, I'll tell you, all these components are designed to run on 12 volts, and these Milwaukee batteries put out about 19 volts, you know, when they're fully charged. And you can hear this thing rips when I turn it on with this battery. So the only disclaimer I'll throw out is that running a 19 volt battery on components that are designed for primarily 12, you're probably shortening the lifespan on them. To me, that doesn't matter, but I'll just throw that out there as a disclaimer. And you can hear the difference here. I'll fire this one up. There is a noticeable difference in fan speed and everything else. So as I said, I'm roughly 1,200 bucks into this thing. I just used a sheet of a 1/4 inch ABS plastic. It's smooth on one side and it has a textured look on the other. A $60 Glowshift gauge. I think it's about $20 or so for the Hot Wheel or Power Wheels adapter. As I said, you could get a converter anywhere between $30 and $80. The pump is about $329. Roughly $30 for an inline filter. I selected this one because this is the same filter I run on the car, and so I have plenty of them. And then I built it so that it can rotate and come off. I can't do it with one hand. It can spin down and clear here and be removable, and it's not going to drip fluid all over everything. between filter changes. Change the filter every couple races, or if I ever have any contamination in the transmission. I bought an $86 Evil Energy -8 kit. It comes with, I think, 20 feet of hose, maybe 12 or 15 feet, I don't remember, but it was plenty to do this job, and a bunch of fittings. I chose number 8. You could use number 8 or number 6 hose based on your preference. I picked number 8 because I had a lot of extra number 8 fittings already in the event that the kit didn't have exactly what I needed to make it work. Small nuts, bolts, fasteners, those things I had mostly laying around. But like I said, that's it in a nutshell. I'll go out to the car now and I'll kind of explain. Okay, here's a stock case Turbo 400, and on the side of the case you've got 2 fittings, an inlet and an outlet. And so essentially the fluid coming out of the torque converter comes out this bottom passage, and normally that would go through a line to a transmission cooler and then return back to the case on the upper fitting, and then it goes in and it lubricates the case and the internals, and then the fluid drips back to the pan. So what we want to do for the transmission cooler is we want to extract the fluid, and most likely the way mine's set up is we pull the fluid out of the pan, and then we interrupt this pathway back into the transmission, and we push the fluid back straight into there so that it goes directly back into the converter, because the converter is discharging it through there. So we're pushing it back in. We continue to dilute that hot fluid in the converter, and then it overfills and drains back into the case, back down to the pan, and then that whole process continues. I'm going to go over under the car right now and kind of show you the actual plumbing and how mine's set up with an external dump. Okay, here we are under the car again, and just above this black hose I have 2 quick disconnects right there on the side of the case. The upper one is the return, and the lower one is the feed out of the converter. And so what happens is the fluid comes out of the converter one, it comes down the bottom here where my finger is. It comes around this hose, disregard the T for now. It comes around this hose into the external dump. I've got an M&M external dump, and normally the fluid then passes through the outlet side and it goes back to the tranny cooler and returns. Well, if you follow this hose, what we've got is I've got it set up on a ball valve. So here's the inlet side of the ball valve. The ball valve is up in the driver's compartment, and the outlet side of the ball valve. So the purpose of that is when we're trying to cool the transmission, the converter on a turbo car is the hottest part. So what we do is by turning that ball valve 90 degrees, it blocks this back portion of the loop for the fluid to return back to the case on the top fitting. So what we're doing is we're going to suck the fluid out of the bottom of the pan on this hose here. This connects to the transmission cooler. So we pull the hot fluid out, it goes through the tranny cooler, it comes back in this other hose, which is teed in to normally the outlet for the transmission, or for the torque converter. By pushing the cooled fluid back into here, it's going to take the path of least resistance. It can go this way back into the transmission, or it can go this way, and like I said, we've got that pathway blocked off with a ball valve. So now the fluid is forced back into the torque converter. The torque converter's cooled off, and then that fluid dumps back into the pan. Here, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, this is what my old transmission cooler was. That's how, in concept, you can get mild to wild with how you want to build these. This thing has worked flawlessly for 5 years now. It's a F250 tranny cooler, an old piece of a lawn chair that I built like a kickstand to it. It would just a little hinge here, so it would set up on its own. I had a really cheap 12-volt fan on the back. I had that same converter and pump that were mounted here on this little piece of diamond plate. So this is not a knock against those guys who sell these. There are some great products, and so if you don't have the ability to build your own, but you still have the need for it, by all means support those guys.
This is more geared towards folks who are kind of like me, like to build your own stuff and so the point of this is that you can do your own stuff. You do it however you want. You can design it to fit into whatever space constraints you have in your trailer. Mine, I built it to go underneath the front workbench of the cabinet. So it's got a nice little cubby hole it tucks into, and that was kind of, so I built it a little bit taller so that I could make it more slender. If you don't have quite as much space, you could certainly build it with things kind of overlapping and make the whole thing a little bit shorter, but maybe a little bit wider or deeper. It really is your own preference. But hope this is helpful. And if you are interested in learning more about these topics I cover, hit the like and subscribe.